Hello and welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm John Bachman. We're here in the studio with former Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum, also a former presidential candidate. You're a guy who is not afraid to say he's open to the idea of another run for office. And let's just assume maybe you're going to run, maybe not. But you were able to rise to the top of the pack in the Republican primaries on a very bare bones, low budget, grassroots campaign that surprised a lot of people. And one of the biggest takeaways, I think, from that campaign is that there is a limit to how much money can be spent in these elections, and sometimes you can have success in an alternative route. Other than that, though, what do you think is the most important lesson you learned from 2012 that you think will apply to 2016, whether you're running, whether Hillary's running, whether Chris Christie's running, whether Rand Paul's running?
Several things. Number one, authenticity is really important. It's not just important in a primary, it's important in a general election. People have to believe in your sincerity and your convictions. You're running for president, you're running for a leadership position. Not everybody's going to agree with you on every position you hold, and most people don't expect to agree with you. What they expect is that you are forthright in what you believe in. They want you to sort of, in a sense, somewhat bare your soul as to who you are and how you'll deal with situations, because there'll be all sorts of issues come up during a presidential term that were never anticipated in a primary or a general election. And I think the American public knows that. So they're looking for qualities of leadership as much as they are for position of issue. And I think that's something that that a lot of Republican establishment types don't recognize. They think it's all about issues, and it's not all about issues. It's about a lot of intangible things. For example, communications. Having someone who's a really strong communicator. I think one of the reasons we did as well as we did is we went out there to Iowa and some of these other early primary states, and we interacted with the voters, and we made a connection. And that is really important. If you look at...
So who's the most genuine, and who has the best communications at this point right now?
I think interesting. I think there's a fair number of good communicators that are out there. I mean, I think...
But who's the best?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not gonna. I don't know.
Out of the names that are being tossed around right now, who's the first name that comes to mind?
Well, I mean, like I said, I think there's a handful of folks that, if you look at the potential field for this time around, are actually pretty effective communicators. Ted Cruz is an effective communicator. I think Chris Christie is an effective communicator. Marco Rubio is another one as an effective communicator. So obviously, I think we were successful because of that. That's very important. If we look at how people relate to the average person out there and how they come across on television is really important. And if you go back from really the age of television and as a decisive medium for presidential elections, really go back to the 1970s, the best communicator has always won the presidency, irrespective of party, irrespective of time. And so I think we need to look at that. And when you have someone like an Al Gore or John Kerry, or even a Mitt Romney who's a little stiff, who doesn't really relate to you're probably not going to win, all things being equal. Now, there may be other factors, but those other factors have never been decisive. The person who is better relational to the American public ends up winning. And that's if there's anything that came away from the campaign, is that we were able to overcome a lot of disadvantages because of authenticity and being able to relate to people. Obviously, being outspent 10-1 has a big impact too. But that isn't going to happen in a general election, as we saw. It doesn't happen in a general election, and so you have to look at things other than money to be the decisive factor in the primary.
Well, I think a lot of folks look at that as a sign of relief when we're so bombarded with all this talk about too much money being in politics.
Yeah.
I think that was a bright spot in the campaign.
Not at all.
Let's move on and talk about this lawsuit that the ACLU has filed against the Catholic bishops, saying that their policies in hospitals may have impacted a woman's health down the road. Obviously a complicated case here, but are we seeing, where does this end? The Catholic Church fighting the policies in Obamacare, the ACLU now fighting the Catholic Church. What is the end game here?
Well, it's very clear to me that we've seen a drumbeat of assault on religion in this country, and it's going to continue. And it's first and foremost been in the courts. It started, with the teaching of the Bible in schools. I mean, it's remarkable to think that here's a country based on Western civilization, the greatest book, the foundational book for the founding of Western civilization is the Bible. I don't think anybody really questions that. It's the most important book in Western civilization, maybe in the world, and yet you can't teach it. You can't teach it. You can't even talk about it. And the ACLU and others wouldn't want you to talk about it. Whether some do, in fact, is another issue, but it's a contentious one, and it's a foolish issue. It is an attempt by those who don't agree with those biblical principles to banish that type of thought from the public arena and from and even from our schools and from from any aspect outside of the church walls itself. That is contrary to everything America has stood for. America is about freedom of religion, not freedom from religion, and this is something the courts have dealt with ham-handedly, created lots of confusion, and haven't stood clearly for what is best for America.
So you think the courts are to blame for not doing a better job of defining this?
Absolutely, no question about it. And
this court in particular?
I wouldn't say this court in particular, but courts over the years, and this court hasn't been particularly strong on this issue either. Look,
and do you fault John Roberts for that?
I fault a whole variety of justices over the course of many, many years who have misunderstood the importance and relevance of faith as a vital factor in maintaining democracy, in maintaining freedom. A good friend of mine, Os Guinness, talks about the iron triangle of freedom, which he says freedom requires virtue, virtue requires faith, and faith requires freedom. And what's happened is the freedom of religion, that faith, that freedom requiring virtue and virtue requiring faith. Faith is necessary to instill virtue. Virtue is necessary for us to be free. If we are not a virtuous people, if we do not constrain ourselves by living lives that are decent and moral, then what happens? Well, go to any neighborhood in America where people don't live moral and decent lives. And what do you have? You have a police state. You have what the opposition says, and from the outside as opposed to constraint from the inside.
And what the opposition says and what the ACLU is saying is if I'm a non-Catholic patient or a non-Catholic employee of one of these institutions, they shouldn't be able to impose their religious beliefs on those folks. How do you balance the two? Because what you said, I think a lot of people agree with that, but there's also the other side. How do you balance the two?
They're a Catholic institution. You go to work for a Catholic institution. You go to work for a Catholic institution. When you walk into
what about the patients who might not have a choice which hospital they go to?
You walk into I don't know of too many communities in America where the Catholic institution is the only one in the community. Usually in these, again, if there is such a case, well then there may have to be accommodations made, but that's usually not the case. Almost all of these Catholic institutions are in major cities that have one or more hospitals. And again, what we're talking about here is not care that is essential life-saving care. What we're talking about are things that can and often are done outside of a hospital setting.
All right, let's leave that there, talk about something that might be a little bit less complicated, and that is the Senate. Some recent polls.
I don't know about that.
Well, at least these polls. Some recent polls show that unnamed Republicans might be edging out unnamed Democrats and these kind of generic ballot, situations looking ahead at 2014. Now, if there is a turnover and the GOP retakes control of the Senate, what does 2014 to 2016 look like? Is that the tipping point that finally lets the Republican Party impose its will on the president and force him to make some serious changes to his signature health care legislation?
I think the control of the Senate's an important thing, but I don't think it's determinative, only because to be able to pass anything in the United States Senate, as we now know from the debate about the filibuster rules, takes 60 votes. So the idea that Republicans control the Senate with 50 or 51 or 52 votes doesn't mean they have the 60 votes to actually pass anything to force President Obama to veto. It will help. It will help control things getting worse, but it won't necessarily turn the tide and force the president to do things, other than from the standpoint of the optics of losing the Senate and what that means for the 2016 election and the next Democratic president. So to you, it
doesn't mean anything? It doesn't mean much.
It means it's more the mood of the country and the direction of the country that is having the Senate in control of Republicans. Again, the way the Senate operates is a majority, a supermajority is necessary to basically function. The Democrats have now changed that with respect to the appointments of nominees, and that will have an impact. The Republicans controlling the Senate, now that these rules are such that it takes a simple majority to approve nominees to the courts and to executive positions, that will have a big impact. So Republican control will have a huge impact on the president's ability to put people in place who are more radical
which gives the Republican Party more leverage and maybe can allow them to impose their will on the president.
It gives them leverage, but again, you still need to have 60 votes to pass a bill. And to repeal Obamacare, you're not going to need just 60 votes. You're going to need 67 votes, because then you're going to have to override a veto. So I think the idea that any kind of major changes will occur because of the Senate changing, I think is probably not accurate. What the Senate changing will do, though, is create a perception that the president has lost ground, and that it may create an opportunity because of the problems in Obamacare, the political fallout from that may result in changing Obamacare, not the number per se of the Senate.
Well, some folks are already writing the president off as a lame duck president. We're barely a year past the election. Is that a mistake?
I think the president has shown that he's not up to the job in a variety of different ways, and I think that's more his lame duck status than anything else. He's proven that from a national security point of view that every foreign leader just runs rings around him, including the Iranians most recently, to the detriment of our security. None of our allies trust him anymore. There's a lack of confidence in America's ability to lead and what we're leading toward. You go at home and you look at the disaster of this economy that continues, and the president's having absolutely no answer other than we need to spend more federal dollars and tax people who create jobs, and regulate them, even worse, regulate them as we see. The good thing about Obamacare and what's happened for the average citizen, which has been a disaster for the average citizen, is now the average citizen actually gets to see what businesses have seen for years, which is government now coming in and saying, we know what's best for you and how to run your business. We know how you should, your safety procedures, we know how your human resources procedures, all of those things now are increasingly mandated and regulated by the government. But the average citizen doesn't see that. The average citizen now is seeing, because it's interacting directly with the government on this healthcare issue, how cumbersome, how
it's complicated. It's difficult. It's 20% of our economy. And whether you're a Democrat or Republican, the goal is the same. It's to make healthcare more affordable, whether it's for the employer or for the employee. How does the Republican?
But that's not what the Democrats' goal is. It's never been what the Democrats' goal is.
Well,
the Democrats' goal has always been,
to the average person who's not hyper political, who just looks at their paycheck and sees how much healthcare costs every month, how do you win that person over who won't classify themselves? These are the folks who swing the elections. How does the Republican Party win those people over and make their healthcare more affordable to the point where they say, I owe the Republicans for that?
Yeah, I think the way I've been advocating for that for 15 years is to move the government out of the idea of coming in and dictating to doctors and hospitals how they run their businesses and insurance companies what they have to offer, and putting resources, instead of from the government, a government plan that you have to participate in, put the resources in the hand of the individual. I've been advocating for 15 years tax credits and other types of tax relief to get money into the hands of every American, so they get treated the same way as someone who has employer-provided health insurance. They have tax-free dollars to use to buy health insurance. And we create a system that allows for real competition among insurance companies to go out and compete for that business, and give the individual the opportunity to join with other individuals, to put together groups, to do whatever is necessary to get a good product for you at a price that you can afford, and put you in control. One of the biggest problems that Obamacare has, and frankly most of the Democratic proposals that are out there, is they do nothing about controlling costs, and they're never going to do anything about controlling costs until we have the consumer involved in healthcare. And so one of the other ideas I've been putting forward, which has picked up a lot of steam over the course of the last few years, back in 1991, I introduced the first health savings account idea. And that to me is ultimately what has to happen, which is individuals taking more control, the government providing them some support through tax credits and deductions for their health insurance costs. But we have to make it based upon you and what's best for you, as opposed to the government dictating how everything runs from the top down.
Anybody who's had a health savings account will tell you it's a successful program and it works. We're going to hear the president out on the campaign trail, if you will, trying to talk up Obamacare and some of the things that he says are working, but we probably won't hear him talk much about those types of things.
No, I mean,
well.
Look, health savings accounts has worked, and it does give people control. It does make you better consumers. The idea that people can't be good healthcare consumers is just ridiculous. I mean, look at the advances of technology that we've seen, and who would have thought we'd be able to make decisions about all these telecommunications options that we have available to us. I mean, there's so much that consumers have over time just learned because you work with it. And that's what we need to do. Make healthcare something that you're familiar with, you work with, that you expect to know the prices of things, that you understand who's creating better quality and who's not. How do you know what cell phone to choose? Well, there's a whole sorts of information about what cell phone is best for you. And consumers can handle that. We can handle what doctor you should be seeing for what problem you might have. This is not rocket science. We can figure this out.
Well, it's a big issue, and one we're not going to solve here today, but we do appreciate your insights on it. Rick Santorum, a pleasure having you with us.
Thank you.
And come back and we'll finish this conversation.
Look forward to it.
And thanks for watching Newsmax TV.